Now, housing accessibility and affordability, they are huge issues in Australia at the moment. And we keep talking about supply. Well, we can only have more supply when we have a healthy construction industry. Unfortunately, over the last 12 months, we have seen numerous private construction companies entering into liquidation. To discuss the consequences of this, I'm joined by Chairman of Quantum Contract Solutions, Cian Brennan. Cian, lovely to have you on the show. Look, mate, we obviously saw muted levels of corporate insolvencies during COVID. Those have risen markedly in recent months, led by the construction sector. Which policies and practices, the ones implemented during COVID, have contributed mostly to the uptick in those construction insolvencies?
Okay, so before we get into that, we have to understand how the construction industry actually works in real life. So top of the food chain, you've got oil and gas companies, you got the government, you got developers. They want to build something eventually. They contract then to a main contractor. Main contractor wins the project, and then he subcontracts out all of the work to the various different subcontractors. What's key here is that the main contractor, the builders, are kind of like financing companies. So they get a big loan from a bank and they subcontract out all the work, and then they get paid by the owner of the whole project. And they make their money on the delta between the two. Now, during COVID, we had various different policies that were put in place to promote the industry. And that's essentially what happened. We kind of had a mini little boom in the construction industry where there were lots and lots of projects. A lot of builders won a lot of projects. And what's important is in these contracts, there's one particular thing that's important. It's called liquidated damages. And that means that if you're late on a project, you have to pay back the owner of the project a certain amount of money to compensate them for you being late. And so what we've seen is three different things have happened. Because of materials and because of lack of people, they haven't been able to deliver their projects on time, which means that they got hit with liquidated damages. That's the first thing. The second thing is they haven't been able to complete the work, which means they never got paid for the work, which obviously hits their cash flow very, very hard again. And the last thing is the cost of financing since pre-COVID to now has gone up remarkably. So the interest rates have gone up. All three of those things combined have strangled people's cash flows, and people are going out of business more and more and more.
And look, just on that materials costs and unavailability of trades, that most definitely has contributed. And how significant do you think that is in the way that it impacts through that construction chain?
It's absolutely massive. I mean, for example, if you're a steel fabricator, and so you're buying steel, you're fabricating it, and then you're selling it off. If during COVID you signed a contract that locked you in for a particular price, the price of steel went up during that period almost 60%. You're instantly losing money, or you just can't deliver the work, and that leads into the problem of work not being completed, getting hit with liquidated damages again, not getting paid, and it just escalates and escalates and escalates. Resources obviously are a massive issue. There's not enough people to do the work, regardless of whatever plans you have to build more houses, to do more things. If there's not enough people in the market to do what you're trying to do, then it's just not possible.
And this is obviously a big issue, particularly with those fixed price contracts that were entered into during COVID, prior to obviously the increase in the cost of materials and the like. Now, is this something that will just, as a matter of time, flow through the system? Will it eventually right itself?
So there's two different ways to look at it. There's two different things. One is the materials. So materials is really, it is an economic thing. So if you look at it just from basic economics, there was a supply glut, costs went up, and hopefully with that supply glut being gone now, the prices should rectify themselves, minus the general cost of inflation across the whole country as a whole. So from a materials point of view, I think that will rectify itself. From a people point of view, if there's not enough people, there's not enough more skilled people coming in, there's not enough people wanting to be in the construction industry, then something needs to change, because that's not going to magically happen by itself.
Absolutely. And does the elevated demand from government to complete big infrastructure projects, as you know, we've got a whole heap here in WA, does that place extra strain on the private sector construction?
100%. So the resources are limited. So if you're pulling people over to infrastructure projects and away from housing projects, well, then the housing projects are not going to be built. It's very simple. If there's not enough people to do the work, then the work isn't going to be done.
Now, onto a really interesting article in the Sydney Morning Herald about a cladding fire on a high-rise building that contributed to the insolvency of an architecture firm. I'm just curious here, Cian, how much of this is a supply chain quality issue and how much of this is a management of risk issue?
So what we're talking in this specific scenario is, I believe, aluminium cladding on a skyscraper. So if it was a supply quality issue, what would have happened was we would say, we want this amount of cladding and it needs to be to this spec. And when it arrived, it wasn't to that spec. So in this scenario, that's not what's happened. So the architect in his role is to design the building, to pick out the various different materials and their specifications, and then give them to the supplier, which the supplier did. Then you have the fire engineer who will say, okay, is this going to catch fire based on the drawings and the specification? And then you have your surveyors that are the people responsible to making sure that it was installed, everything has been done as it's supposed to have been done. Now, my understanding is all three of these parties are being sued for their role in it. The aluminium cladding was combustible, which means that the specification, the material chosen by the architect is incorrect. The fire engineer didn't catch it. The surveyor didn't catch it. So it's a risk issue, not a supply chain quality issue.
Fair enough, and I think that those legal proceedings are ongoing, so who knows who's ultimately going to be found responsible here. We obviously don't know at this stage, but it's interesting how something can get from a drawing all the way onto a building and it ends up being in that condition. Look, that's all that we've got time for, Cian Brennan. Thank you so much for your time.